Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone here watching Game Over Winnipeg. My name is Liz, one of your regular hosts, and I am back here with Nick covering another Jets loss to the Vegas Golden Knights. So, must be a day that ends in Y. I'll be honest with you, I'm getting tired of these. Nick, how are you doing tonight?
Not bad. These late ones are a little tough, but and the game was not great. So I've had better nights, but doing all right. How you doing tonight, Liz?
I'm good, and I am ready to chat Winnipeg Jets with you. So, for everyone who's here live in the chat, thank you so much for being here. Just a reminder, the regular drill. We're going to talk some Jets. We're going to go over a couple things that happened in tonight's game, and then we're going to kind of open up the floor, go through some chat questions, chat with you guys about any ideas you have, thoughts you want to, share, anything like that. But feel free to make sure you're connecting with one another in the chat as the show goes on. But let's dive right into it. So, Winnipeg Jets capping off a 5-2 loss to the Vegas Golden Knights. Second matchup of the season. Second loss of the season. Laurent got his Stanley Cup ring today, so congrats to him. Very happy that he was able to get that right from Kelly McCrimmon, which is really great. Before we get into the specifics of the game, I just wanted to point out we had a couple players on the Winnipeg Jets that were wearing some neck guards tonight. Heard that there were a couple of comments from a few of the players when asked about it, saying they're going to try and get used to it and things like that, in support of Adam Johnson and the tragedy that occurred over the last couple days. So really nice to see a couple of influential players in this team. I want to say, I counted 4 tonight? I don't know how many you saw that were wearing the neck guards. There were 4 in
That
practice.
sounds right.
4 in practice yesterday, 4 tonight. Rasmus Kapari wasn't wearing it in the game, but Neil Pionk wasn't wearing it in the practice. So, and then Perfetti, Ehlers, and Nemestikov, that whole third line, was cooking up the neck guards tonight. It's nice to see. Hopefully, as players, start to wear them a little bit more in practices and games and get more used to them, it becomes more of a norm to avoid any scary accidents again in the future. So really nice to see that tonight. I know I made a tweet earlier about it, talking about how I played 2 seasons of ringette without elbow pads because the elbow pads I had were really
Without
uncomfy.
elbow pad.
Yeah, it was a really stupid call. I was also like 12. But I played 2 full seasons without them because they were uncomfortable. And I was like, I can't shoot very well. And they're just kind of scratchy and itchy. And so I know what it's like to have equipment that sucks to wear. But, the reason that players have gone from no shoulder pads, no helmets, no gloves, and all those kinds of things to where we are today is because of the protection that's, been deemed necessary. And even though it's not always the most comfortable, I have a feeling that this is going to be kind of the new norm that we see over the course of the next few years. I don't know about you.
Yeah, the no elbow pad thing is kind of wild
I
because that
know.
was the one piece of equipment I hated forgetting because you fall on that elbow, it's so uncomfortable.
I
But
never
I
did
know
once.
that's crazy to me. I had one practice and I learned from then on, always elbow pads. But I know when I played junior, I too didn't wear a neck guard. Once we got to the age where it was not necessary, it's just one of those things. You forget to put it on once, you realize you're comfortable, and you just don't wear it again. But seeing what happened the other night, that was really tough to stomach. And yeah, there is different pieces of equipment. Why not go with it to stop something that was a tragedy this week? Tough to watch.
100%, yeah. So, moving into the specifics of the on ice product that we saw in this game tonight. Couple of things to point out as always. We're definitely going to touch on the special teams. I'm definitely going to talk a little bit about the defense. But I want to just kind of start and preface it by saying that this was a game that sucks to watch when you're supposed to talk about it afterwards because it was just frustrating. You could look at
Mm-hmm.
analytics, you could look at what's going on the ice and all those kinds of things. They got some bad penalties at bad times. They can't score on special teams and their mistakes were bad mistakes. It's not that
Mm-hmm.
deep, but it's that frustrating,
100%. And it's funny you say that because yeah, I was thinking that honestly halfway through the game. I'm like, oh, I promised Liz I'd jump on today. This is a tough one. But the one thing too, like looking at the analytics, I actually found that that was a game where the numbers I think painted a rosier story for the Winnipeg Jets than I kind of saw. They did sustain some play, especially again that Lowry line seems to be the line to do that. Started off with a big start to the second, but I didn't find the Jets to be a better 5-on-5 team. I know they kind of strung some plays along, but it felt like Vegas was more dangerous all night, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think to me the possession numbers and things like that come from control of play, which at the end of the day is an extremely important thing to come from. But I felt like the quality of like within that control of play was just kind of dog for the Jets. Like
Mm-hmm.
they did a good job of managing the puck pretty well, I think, to keep it away. From Vegas once they actually had possession. You know, there were some really tough goes with some bad takeaways and giveaways and stuff like that. But you know, it's hard when you're like, oh, they're doing these little things right and those, you know, little things wrong or whatnot. But it's the collective of Vegas just when they had those chances doing it better, you know?
Yeah, Vegas. What I find to me that I saw two different tiers of teams out there as far as Vegas doesn't make very many mistakes, even when they get caught running around that middle of the slot. Typically speaking, they really do a good job of clamping down there. The Jets did spend a lot of zone time down there for stretches. Again, that Lowry line was pretty good at getting to the slot, but other than that, it felt like, to me anyways, outside the Kyle Connor goal and the Lowry line, that there wasn't a lot of very big opportunities in the slot. It felt like they kind of whiffed on their best chances. I remember, I think Lowry had two shots in that first shift, or which should have been shots from right in front of the goalie, and kind of whiffed on both. Perfetti on the first power play had the open slot from the or shot from the slot and passed it outwards. Like, it felt like when they would get those chances, they didn't feel that dangerous because something would happen. And then on the other end, Vegas is just so fast and so aggressive in transition that, yeah, they may not have piled up a ton of shots right in front of Connor Hellebuyck, but it felt like all of those opportunities were dangerous because they were coming on odd man rushes. They were coming in breaks in the D zone pressure, and it just, they might not have piled up a ton from the slot, but they all felt dangerous. And I don't know, it just, to me, that felt like a game Vegas was in control the whole way, honestly.
It's so funny. I want to say the first time I really ever heard this argument and believed it was when people were talking a little bit about Connor McDavid. When a couple years ago, someone started talking about his possession numbers and how his possession numbers weren't like super awesome, and they're like, it's because he doesn't have a lot of positive zone time because he carries it into the zone and he scores right away. And that was one thing that I kind of found with Vegas tonight was, like you said, with the odd man rushes, like they were capitalizing. It wasn't necessarily scored every time, but it was like they would come in and get like a high danger chance and then Connor Hellebuyck would swallow it or they'd score or whatever. They weren't cycling and doing the nothingness that the Winnipeg Jets tend to like to do, especially on the power play. So I feel like that kind of is conducive to that. But honestly, let's start with the power play. Let's talk there. I want to talk about the Lowry line too, so move into that afterwards. But let's start by talking about that power play a little bit. So my first thoughts on it are, I genuinely feel like there must be some big thing that I'm missing, because why on any planet is Cole Perfetti in the slot and Mark Scheifele on the wall when you have a player that can control the puck from the wall and then a player who can shoot really well from the slot? I don't understand why that's the formation. It's so static. It's so boring. Cole Perfetti is not even a shooting threat. He had that shot, that one that you were talking about, because there's nobody on him, because everyone's cheating to Connor or Scheifele because they are like, Cole Perfetti is not going to score from the slot. Like, it's just, everything about the setup is just so predictable and so unexciting. I feel like that one small switch could change that just a little bit.
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because the Jets end up breaking the streak with a shot from Cole Perfetti in the slot off of Iafalo's hand. But I too have a lot of issues with the personnel setup right now, and it really goes down to a few things I've kind of noticed over the last few games. For one, obviously you brought it up, Mark Scheifele on the flank. Mark Scheifele doesn't have the type of shot that's beating goaltenders from out far, but he has a great shot from in tight. The release is good, but he's also a pass first player, so it almost feels like he's trying to be the Blake Wheeler of the opposite side of years, or same side, no, opposite side of years past, when they need him, if he's going to be on that flank, to be a shooting threat. And you really nailed it. There's no movement at all, and it's frustrating because we always hear the reason why the format is this format is because Mark Scheifele has his slot, Kyle Connor has his slot. When you look at some of the best power plays in the NHL, you're not spending the entire shift in those spots. You're looking for movement. You're looking to create 2-on-1s, and the Jets just don't do that on the power play. The puck goes down, and here's another problem too with the format right now is Morrissey as a lefty has to open up before passing to Mark Scheifele. So Mark Scheifele is already not going to be a shooter, and it's predictable. So teams are kind of getting up there on him, and then he's sitting there just stick handling, hoping something opens up instead of moving around. And then the opposite is almost the problem on the other flank with Kyle Connor. He's more dangerous the tighter he gets to the net. And right now they're feeding this whole power play as if Mark Scheifele is Nick Backstrom and Kyle Connor is Alex Ovechkin, and that's not what you have in those players. So the lack of movement's frustrating. It's hard to watch. It's almost deflating when they get a power play at this stage. And I agree, like there's got to be a few changes coming in who operates what spot. There should be movement, but yeah, it's hard to watch right now.
Yeah, I think, and even, I know you're giving me a hard time on that Cole Perfetti, the shot there or whatever, but even if I remember that goal correctly, there was a puck retrieval that came from the corner and everyone was slightly out of position. Like, all of the dangerous chances that they've had over the course of these, 17 power plays that they've had where they've gone 1 for 17, the best chances they've had are when someone screws up and the puck goes into the corner or whatever, and they have to regroup, and when they're not fully reset and they're still moving around, and Kyle Connor does one of those fancy twist around shots or whatever, and you're not necessarily prepared for it, because predictability is the worst thing that you can have on a power play, because the players who are killing the penalty, if there's any form of structure that they can build themselves around, they're going to do it because they're at a disadvantage, right? So if they can read things, they're going to read them. So I feel like if you know exactly who these players are, and we're not NHL players, and we can so obviously tell exactly what each guy's role is and how it's going to work. And last game, or maybe when was Rangers, was that last game? I feel like it might have been. I have no idea.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Brady and I were talking about this too. So if anyone is here in the chat from last game, I'm sure a lot of this is some similar conversation, but it rings just as true. He's talking about how Adam Fox at one point was hanging out in front of the net. He's like, you cycle the puck around, he's moving through, and your guys need to end up in different places. And if it's a whole thing where Mark Scheifele likes his spot on the side, well, you know what? I also like making 6 figures at my part-time job right now, but I don't get to do that because it's not helping my organization do anything, right? If that's the spot that he likes, but it's not helping the team, I don't know what we're doing here. But if they move around enough, he'll get to play that part sometimes, no matter what his anchor spot is. So if he likes it there, move more. Maybe it's a challenge, right? You throw him in the slot, and it's like, oh, you want to shoot from there? Move the power play around and do some stuff. And I think you made a really interesting point about how he's taking more of that anchor role, which is so not his responsibility, in my opinion. I know, losing Blake Wheeler is interesting because he was as much of a role player on the power play as Kyle Connor is in a different capacity, but that's why they need Cole Perfetti, and they need him to develop some confidence there, because then he can take that role and everyone else can do what they need to do.
Yeah, and I'm going to use an example here for both the penalty kill and the power play. So with the power play, having the extra guy, the goal really is to find a 2-on-1 at some point in the ice where you can exploit a defender. And with the power play, the way the Jets run it, you're not creating that because it's so stationary. You're not making it hard for the defense. You're not making them have to make a read. They could, for the most part, the Jets are killing off their own power plays, just standing around, passing up and down, not really creating anything. And then on the opposite end of the ice, I saw it again today, and something that concerned me a lot with the penalty kill is it almost feels like the Jets penalty killers, they're down a man, and 2 guys are often getting sucked to the puck, which means there's a 4-on-2 behind both defenders. We saw it in the first penalty kill. They ended up killing it off, but Jack Eichel was drawing Adam Lowry and Dylan DeMello in, and it created a backdoor chance down to Stone, who gets it over because the D's got to make a move. So it's almost like the Jets power play is spending too much time practicing against the Jets penalty kill or something, because it's the only way this power play would work right now is going against the Jets penalty kill, which also needs to be a lot better.
Yeah, no.
What's your thoughts there?
100%. No, sorry. I was just typing in the chat here and letting everyone know to like the stream if they're here, and especially like it if you're relieved to see that power play goal tonight. But yeah, and I think Julian captures a good point here about how, like, analytics don't capture when you look at the small percentage of plays just how stupid those plays are and how that can change everything. So that's kind of the big piece of this, and that's why, 5-on-5 there are so many things, and we can get into that Lowry line before we move on from this, or after we move on from this topic. But it's just like the special teams are killing them. They're literally murdering them right now, and it's so hard to be like, trying to justify, oh, there are good things happening at 5-on-5. It's like none of that matters if you're sinking yourself the single second someone gets in the box from either team.
100%. And Julian makes a good point too on the stupid plays, because this team is, one of its biggest issues is it's very good at shooting itself in the foot with either boneheaded decisions or turnovers. And yeah, it might not reflect in a lot of quality against, but it's reacting in enough quality against that's tilting games the other way right now.
100%, yeah. But there were some periods of time kind of away from some of those penalties, particularly at the beginning of that second period, and then also at the beginning of the third period. We're at 5-on-5. The Jets were kind of on Vegas like white on rice, which is always a kind of relieving thing to see, because you see other teams do it to you all the time. So it's nice when your team kind of can give it back for a bit. So there's some really good things that I really liked in those two stretches in particular, and a lot of that centers around that Lowry line. And if I'm being honest with you, I'm starting to get really frustrated actually by how many, like, it's like a resentful thing with how we're singing the praises of Niederreiter and Lowry and all these kinds of things, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, if all you can do is talk about how good this third line is, like, it would be one thing if the other players who you're not praising were still like contributing to a certain capacity. Like if this Lowry line is coming out of the woodwork and scoring all these goals, it's like, wow, this is so exciting. And if, it's a give and take where those top lines can just sort of, hold their own and suppress the Vegas Golden Knights for a little bit, and then the Lowry line comes out and is firing on all cylinders, and that's where you get your goals, I wouldn't care. But we're talking about how great this line is. But it's like, the fact that we have to be talking about how good a third line is, like, there's a huge glaring hole right now that we really got to address. And maybe that's the pessimist in me, but let's not be the pessimist in me. Talk about how good that Lowry line is and what you like about them.
It's impressive how good they are at kind of turning over momentum, if you believe in it. I thought them starting the second period, as an example, was pushing the right buttons, because they went out there, had a shift, and it kind of created that effect of the next couple lines had some quality chances. Then they came out a second time again and were generating, and it helped shift the game. So one thing we know is the top six guys, for the most part, aren't great defensively. But if all of a sudden the Adam Lowry line is driving the bus and creating more offensive starts for those guys and creating chances of their own, like, Nino has just been such a big piece to that line. It should, in theory, help propel the other two top guys. I know tonight on the road, matchups aren't as easy to pull. But when the Winnipeg Jets are at home and you have a line like this, it should free up those guys to score. And with the inconsistency of both top six lines at 5-on-5 right now, it feels like all for naught from the other group in a sense, because realistically, no one came into this year saying Adam Lowry's line was going to drive this bus. And it can't if this team wants to be successful. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's with any team, and you talk about, the playoff depth and how, you need all four lines to be doing things or whatever, but they need to be doing things like within their realm. So what the Adam Lowry line needs to be doing is still dealing with the tough matchups and letting that top six run wild, which right now I'm trying to remember the lines that I want to say we were still doing 1-1 tonight. Like, Eichel and Stone were against the Scheifele line, right? For the most
If you're Vegas, that's exactly what you want too.
Right.
So.
Well, exactly. So what the Jets, I feel like, ideally should want and need is for Lowry to still manage that brutal matchup, and then have, this offensive flair, this pressure, those really nice, like, Nino finished checks and all those kinds of things, and still, like, not lose that, because that's really key and that's really important. But if they're matching up against the other team's second or third line and getting these goals, it's great. But the aggregate of, the chances at 5-on-5 when you're matching these lines for the team, which is what they all care about and what we all care about, is still going to be in the net negative. So you got to put more pressure onto this Lowry line. So I'm kind of changing the subject a little bit, but they broke them up in the third period, right? After that Vegas power play goal, they put Iafallo back on that line and Mason Appleton back up, which, didn't work last time for the top six thing. Iafallo was great on the third line, but of course he was. But see, to me, what I would have preferred to do is have the team do their best to switch the lines matchup and not lose the kind of chemistry that they had going, as opposed to trying to divide the wealth and try and get the other lines going. So I feel like it's hard when you don't have the last change, but I wasn't sure if splitting them up was the right call, as opposed to just trying to put more of the load on them. What did you think?
Yeah, it gets hard to chase the matchup, especially down in a game in Vegas. But I'm at a point where I don't want that Lowry, Nino, Appleton line to be switched up at all. I think they have to find some answers in that top six. And I think it all comes down to splitting up Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele until Gabe Vilardi's back. And if you want to give that another run, go right ahead. But we know the story. The Nemestikov line, I didn't think it was one of their best nights, but over the course of the year, they've been generating chances. That's just a line we need to see some more goals out of. I don't know what they can do in that top six if that's gonna work. If you're stuck on keeping Connor and Scheifele together, just knowing what the aggregate means down the lineup. You just know in most nights you're having a top line that's playing the most minutes, that's gonna get outplayed, and you're almost hoping the middle six can overtake that. And that gets awfully tough. I don't know what the answer is right now, because realistically, Nino is probably the guy if you're going to try and jumpstart a line, just knowing what we know, he is that premium player on that line. But you also don't want to change that line because they've been the best line for a week now. So I don't know what the answer is going to be. I know Mason Appleton isn't the answer, and he's playing good hockey, much better hockey than I think social media wants to give him credit for. And today's probably a day where he's getting rewarded for playing a pretty decent game, but we know it doesn't work. So I don't know. I want to see them keep that Lowry unit together and try some different things with the six guys you have in that top six until Gabe Vilardi gets back, because it's just not good enough, and he's not going to be back for another 2 to 4 weeks. I don't know. What's your thoughts here?
No, I think kind of I'm in agreement with you on it, where right now it's because I always understand the whole idea of that not everything is an isolated play. It's throw Nino up there and you think it's going to make this line 20% better, but if it makes that line 60% worse, well, it's a net negative, so you shouldn't do that sort of thing. I understand. So in my opinion, you just start moving around the pieces within those top six players as is right now, because there's no risk to that, because it's not like you're going to lose anything, because they aren't really doing much. Every other game, the Ehlers line is quite good, but I think that's going to happen even if you put Ehlers with a couple of bags of pucks. Every now and then he's still going to have a good line.
I got to say this, though. That was game 2 out of the last 3 where Nik Lynam just passes better. That's a guy that the Jets really need to get going here.
Yeah, no,
he's
for sure.
He's too big to that top six scoring that they need him going.
And right now he's not going. Mark Scheifele's not going. Kyle Connor's not going. None of these guys are going as it stands right now. So you run no risk at starting to juggle things around up there, because it's not like you're giving up 2 goals a game. You're giving up nothing, because they're not really doing a whole ton. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in there. And I agree with you, and I agree with Brody. Brody in the chat said the same thing as you did. He said it after you did on our end, but our stream is a little bit behind. So you guys said at the same time, he's split up Kyle Connor and Mark Scheifele. It's got to happen at this point. Because I just don't think that, and as good as Alex Iafallo has been, it's just not enough to bump that line up to where they need to be in order to be the top line. And I said this last game, and I'll say it forever and ever, this team very clearly, with the contract signed and things that they've outwardly said, wants to win this year. And if you want to win, your top line has to be better than other teams' top lines. It's not. and that includes power play times when you're supposed to have your offensive weapons being offensive weapons. So I just think they just need to run some tweaks in that top six, and you don't even need to touch that third line because the third line is made up of third line players, so they can stay down there, and you're not jeopardizing anything that's, you're not ruining a good thing you got going in the top six because there isn't much.
Here's a question just came to my head as we're talking about this here. If you bumped Niederreiter up to that line, because clearly it needs it, and if you're not going to split the two up, does that third line lose a lot going to IXL Fallow with Appleton and Lowry? Like, is that the easiest short-term solution? Just thinking about it out loud, if you're not going to do what everyone's calling for, and that is splitting up the big two. I mean,
Yeah,
I
no,
think that should still work.
I
But
don't hate it. I just feel like I don't know, and maybe it's because I'm not confident enough yet. I don't think I've watched enough Alex Iafallo, and frankly enough, Nino Niederreiter. He's only been with the team for the last few months, and I like to have larger samples and that to be like, I feel like I know Cal Connor like the back of my hand, and I don't feel that way about either of those players. But right now, I feel like they bring similar things. I get sick of the metaphors or whatever, but the meat and potatoes one keeps coming up when talking about these players because they do kind of have that sort of vibe that they bring to the team. So I don't know if it actually changes a ton for that top line. Do you think it does?
I think Nino would actually, because what that line's kind of missing, because we know where Kyle Connor's faults are, and we saw his high end skill on display with that goal tonight. But I think Nino Niederreiter would bring an element to that line that's missing through transition alongside Mark Scheifele. And as far as getting into the zone and creating havoc for those two, and we know that he could put the puck in the net himself. I do think he can impact that line. He's probably, outside of a Gabe Velarde or Nick Ehlers, probably the third best option for that line. So I do think he could actually bring that kind of impact.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely would be open to trying it. Because I do think that there is kind of an added element there that could definitely, like you said, about the transition piece, like, and especially in a game like tonight against Vegas, where you're watching it in real time happen, to you, you see how effective it can be. So if you can make those tweaks to be more effective in that capacity internally, you'll probably win a couple more hockey games. I think, what was it, that William Karlsson goal, I think was a perfect, like, textbook example of how, you can effectively turn defense into offense if you manage the passes quickly, and all those kinds of things. And I think, like, a lot of this, we're Jets fans. I'm a Jets fan. I live in a world of me. So I always look at things in the capacity of a Jets fan. But a lot of this came down to, I think, Vegas being really effective in those areas tonight to kind of expose those Winnipeg Jets weaknesses too. So it's not, trying to be a Winnipeg Jets hate fest. And maybe I should give more credit to Vegas with, how I feel like they play their 5-on-5 defense pretty high up. So when they poke those pucks out of Nate Schmidt or whoever it is at any given point, then it's that whole, defense to offense. And then you catch them kind of on what's flat-footed, I guess is the term I'm looking for, and they're not set up positionally and all those kinds of things. And that's when you get those transition chances that I just feel like the Jets don't effectively capture as much the way their current forward lines are set up.
Yeah, and I think Vegas does deserve a lot of credit. They seemed, in my opinion, to let that game come to them, and they dictated it from there. They didn't, like, it felt like at times the Jets were trying to force things, and Vegas was just like all over it. That D zone, they're just suffocating. And transition, they're a fast team. They made the Jets look really slow. But I gotta say, the underlying story today, you gotta give an assist to the city of Las Vegas, because the Jets were clearly having the Vegas flu tonight. With how, like, the Jets aren't a smart team as far as how they play a game a lot today, but there was so many slow reactions, so many brain farts that you just know that a team that flew out on Wednesday from Winnipeg really enjoyed their time in Vegas, and it really showed. I mean, two of the goals came off brutal line changes, and some of the reads that we were seeing out there, like, they were a second slow all over the ice. And I think it's fairly obvious as to why. I mean, an early season probably rookie party out in Las Vegas, and 48 hours between games, or I guess 72 hours between games.
Yeah,
I'm sure the boys had a fun time. Let's put it that way.
I can't say I'm as much of a conspiracy theorist as you are, but I will say, a month out of
We'll
returning.
hear about this. We'll hear about this in a few months. Don't
No,
you worry.
but I was gonna say, a month out of returning to hockey, Gabe Vilardi also happened to go on this trip. Like, come on.
Who amongst us wouldn't go on a bad knee to party with the boys? I mean,
No,
you got to get the
100%.
early season bonding, and it's the perfect spot in the schedule for a little team out of the ring festivities. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a full circle moment to kind of how we started the show, with being like, it's at the end of the day it was just a frustrating game, because there were a lot of things that I kind of liked about this game, and how the Jets manage the puck okay at 5-on-5, and as frustrated as I am with how they shoot, there were still some things that I thought they did better than Vegas and all those kinds of things, but it just was an overall like little mistakes that turned into big errors, and vice versa sort of thing, that just kind of took over the game and the result that sort of overshadow, the winning the expected goals battle, or whatever the common sayings are when you come to try to understand the whole fabric of the game. But that's the way that sports work, right? Especially in a game that has as much luck and random chance and bounces and non-isolated plays as hockey does. So, like, c'est la vie, every hockey game is like this, but this one just seemed a little bit more amplified in that capacity tonight.
100%. It's I don't have much to add to that. What'd you think of the D pairing swaps and what we saw?
Okay, so you'll have to remind me what part of the game that happened in, and then what the actual switches were, because I'll be honest, I was kind of tuning it out by the end of it. What were they? I think I lost Nick on the call here, so I'm just gonna quickly jump back. Hold on. I'm gonna bring him back into the waiting room because he left the Zoom call. But maybe he just had to leave because he was looking for the D pairings for me. But we'll bring him back in. Oh, there you go. Back.
Yeah, sorry about my screen just shut off out of nowhere. That was weird.
All good. So walk me through the D pairings. What time of the game was the switch ish? And then...
I want to say it was towards the end of the second. We saw Morrissey Pionk, we saw DeMello, Sandberg, and we saw Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon down the back half of that game.
Yeah, this is gonna be like a crazy hot take. A couple people brought it up in the chat, a couple people brought it up on Twitter. This defense has not been defensing for this whole season. Like, everyone just kind of looks a little bit off their game. So a lot of people are like, all right, when's it happening? Like, when's Declan Chisholm getting his chance in? I wonder if this was their transition period of putting Brendan Dillon with who his likely partner would be, in my opinion, if they brought in Declan Chisholm next game. I don't know.
That's an interesting theory, actually. I hadn't gotten that far along. That makes some sense, because there's been some really rough moments for 88, but also what I thought the D changes really highlighted is just how badly this team needs 2 D upgrades. Not even just one at this stage, because Morrissey and Pionk is too chaotic in the D zone. A lot of fun for the same reason in the O zone. Dylan DeMello and Sandberg, I don't love, because both guys are guys you'd prefer to be moving the puck to a guy that can skate it out or pass it. Both guys right now are really having trouble with puck movement, so I don't love that idea, even though I think both are quality defenders. And yeah, Brendan Dillon and Nate Schmidt, I mean, I don't have much to say there. So that's an interesting theory. I'd be down for it at this point. I just don't think it could get much worse. I think this team desperately needs Billy Hanel back and a top 2 or 3 defenseman add if we want to be serious about fixing what ails this team.
Yeah, and I think it's tough, and it's real when I say it. Dylan DeMello is not the 1B defenseman on a Stanley Cup team. Like, he's been a good
No.
temporary fix for a couple years, and he's been one of the Winnipeg Jets' best defenders. Like, this is not a Dylan DeMello hate fest whatsoever, but like, we're starting to see when we have these forward lines that aren't producing and they aren't playing defense either and all these kinds of things. Like, I just feel like this year in particular, and Josh Morrissey's not Josh Norrisy, and Brendan Dillon to me has looked not as good as he looked last year. I didn't like Brendan Dillon as much in his first year. I thought last year he was quite excellent, actually, and then this year so far, I've not been a huge fan. So all these little things kind of not working out at the same time, but mostly in particular, the Josh Morrissey piece, it's not his fault, is just kind of, I feel like, proving that Dylan DeMello is an excellent second or third pairing defenseman, one of my favorite players in the league. I adore him with my whole heart, but he's not like every single night getting that top matchup, those 20 plus minutes, penalty killing, like all those kinds of things. Like, it's just, that's not his role. And there's no one though better suited for it on this team right now. So that's how you know that it's a problem that needs to be solved externally.
Yeah, they don't have options. Like, you got to try something, but where you end up is just not in a good place. You go from one quality pair that, it has had some really tough struggles with decision making this year, which is not something we've always seen from DeMello and Morrissey. But by making that switch, there's not really a pairing I trust at any level of the game that much. So I don't know who it's going to be. Maybe it's someone out of Calgary with the way things are going over there, but that has to be the biggest priority for this team. It has to.
I think that's a good segue kind of into how we'll wrap up the show here. We're getting on over the 35-minute mark, and we're at almost 12:30. I don't know about you, but
time flies, man.
Work to do tomorrow, but it's been a fun one, and we'll just do a quick last minute call out for some questions in the chat. I have one here that I think is a great kind of add on to what you were just talking about. David is asking if we see pressure for bigger, bolder changes to the Jets roster heating up if the team continues to struggle. And I don't think, like, it's so funny. Like, I look at the San Jose Sharks and I look at the Ottawa Senators and all these fan bases and I'm like, oh, honey, And, like, the Jets have gone, what? Like, the last, like, 4 or 5 games, like, they've gone pointless in, like, 1 or 2. Like, they're not doing terribly, but it's just, let's be real, it's so much easier to get on here and talk about what the team is doing wrong because those are the conversation pieces. But I do think that if this team isn't, like, if their top line isn't, what I was saying before, like, if they're not having those pieces that a cup contender needs to have, where the top line is being a top line, the 1A defenseman is being a 1A defenseman, and those types of things, I do think there might be some changes that they make, but I'm just not sure because I just don't think it's in the mantra of how the Winnipeg Jets run operationally to trade a player who's not, like, either a prospect or expiring to bring in someone better. Like, I don't think they're the type of team that trades Neil Pionk to get a better defenseman. I think they trade for Neil Pionk. Like, that's how they operate. Like, so I'm not convinced.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. What do you think?
I'll go the opposite way. To answer Dave's question, I want to go a few different ways here. To answer Dave's question, I do think there's going to be early pressure this year, unlike in years past. And for a few reasons, I think that last year, it was a pretty open secret that Mark Scheifele wasn't very happy. They didn't make an early trade while the team was hot. Everyone knew they had depth issues, and it just felt like that team needed a boost early on. And by the time we got to the deadline, things got tight, things were tough. They didn't do it, right? So between that aspect and going through that last year, I think that's going to be in the back of their head. Also with the attendance issues, that's going to be in the back of their head. And the fact that they just locked up both those guys, I think you're going to see a shift here. I don't think it'll come up front because I do think the org is fully expecting a guy like Rutger McGroarty to impact this year at the end of the year. Maybe Brad Lambert if he keeps going on this tear. But I do think they're going to get aggressive on the D side of things. I think some of the rumors we heard this summer, especially the one I was shouting from the rooftops for, was trading 18 overall and Nate Schmidt into Travis Sanheim. That was something that was pretty public. So I think we will see a shift in that regard where everyone knows what their problem is. Clearly they do, And now that I wonder if Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele, if they signed in June, if the Sanheim thing would have happened. Whereas they weren't signed, it was a lot to ask to move a first, even though you're getting a long-term player. I do think you'll see the Jets get aggressive early. It's just going to depend on other teams falling out of it, like a Calgary deciding, you know what, we'll shop our defensemen, which would be a great team to buy from. Because right now on the market, there's only really bad contracts up front kind of floating around. But I do think once a team like Calgary pulls the trigger, I think you'll see the Jets get aggressive. We saw them trade for Dylan DeMello, I want to say, in like January when they got him. It might have been early February, but it was well out from the draft or trade deadline, if I'm not mistaken. And I do think you'll see that team get aggressive this year.
Interesting. I feel like
I think there's just too much at stake.
This is a good episode, I feel like, to like bookmark and put in your back pocket, because we're kind of coming in with the random hot takes that I feel like, I don't know, if some of these sort of transpire into anything could be really interesting. I think you and Brody have just been on the same wavelength in the chat this whole time. Brody's kind of in the same boat. He said talks about Hanifin, interested in Anderson if they'd be willing to move him. Calgary, because I feel like Calgary's gonna sell everyone and their dog at some point, because it's just vibes are terrible and they're not going anywhere. So I'd be interested to see if some unconventional names in the market show up. I'm still convinced that the Winnipeg Jets will be more likely to move like a player who's like on an expiring deal or whatever, as opposed to one of their current guys, because I feel like it doesn't make sense. It's almost like an eye for an eye for them to do Pionk for Sanheim or something like that.
No, I'm gonna go the opposite way again. Okay. This is a good chat. Keep going. Keep going.
No, but I agree with you, and that's what I would want to. I just feel like it's the kind of thing, and how maybe I'm doubling back here, because I was so convinced in training camp. I was like, they will never scratch a $6 million player for Ville Heinola. There is a 0% chance this organization would ever do that. But there were talks about it, and it was like kind of, it was almost imminent until that happened and everything. So maybe I'm wrong. I just don't think that this team will make a trade that moves someone like Pionk, Schmidt maybe, but Pionk or Dylan or DeMello or something like that to bring in another defenseman who's just a little bit better, because I just don't think they're going to think it's worth it enough.
Okay, so I'm going to go the opposite route here. And this is something we kind of started seeing last year because of the cap, and it is going up next year, but some of these trades we're going to have to look at as the roster piece just being salary filler. And to kind of look at that would be like looking at the NBA and how NBA trades work, because salary matches almost are inevitable in every NBA trade. And with, I want to say it's like 18 teams, might even be higher, capped out. For teams to create movement, they're going to have to move money off their books. And also, I do think if there's an opportunity in season for a Nate Schmidt or Neil Pionk to be included in a trade for a D-man, likely they'd want it with term, I would assume. But it would also be the Jets accomplishing what's inevitable next summer early by including them. Like, the Jets will not go into next year with Nate Schmidt and Neil Pionk both on the roster. Remember this bookmark it? I just can't see it. So including one of them would just be part of doing business. There will likely be an extra cost if it's Nate Schmidt. But I do see that actually being a realistic option. On the names we kind of heard Brody mention, I think Hanifin is someone this org would push hard for, because one of the things you see in hockey is GMs have those favorites from time and time ago. And there was a lot of rumblings during the Hanifin draft year that the Winnipeg Jets were trying to get up into the top 6, 7, 8 picks to try and get Noah Hanifin. So I would put that in the back of my head and think about it. Though I'll say this, and this is where it gets a little scary for me, is the projected contract is more than what Devin Taves got, and that's not a player I'd want to commit that kind of money to. I think you're running into some long-term issues there, but that is a guy I do think there will be something there. Rasmus Anderson would be the dream. I just don't see Calgary moving him. Nikita Zadorov might be the play there.
Yeah, I've heard that one kind of swirling around a little bit too. I think it's the kind of thing where it's like people just think it's like open season on the Calgary Flames, so people are chatting about it a little bit. But I like it. Like it's fun to hear about, especially the Noah Hanifin one. I don't know.
And the dream one, but his no trade kicked in this summer, would be Mackenzie Weegar. It's
Oh
a
my
big
God.
long-term contract,
Oh my
but
God.
I don't know if we should get excited about that one.
I would plan the parade at True North Square if we got
Plus, I
Mackenzie
think
Weegar.
Calgary's going to try and retool. I don't think they're blowing it up completely, so they're going to keep some guys.
Yeah. Jonathan Huberdeau, anyone? Jonathan Huberdeau? Okay, I think that kind of wraps up the general gist of our show tonight. It's getting late. There are a couple people live in the chat. It's nice to see all you guys here. Make sure you hit a like on the stream before you head out. Thanks for staying up with us. It's always a good time. And if you're listening back tomorrow on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your shows, or even here on YouTube, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate the listens. If you don't get the chance to watch the shows live and interact with us in the chat, make sure you're interacting with us over on Twitter. That's kind of where both Nick and I, as well as my co-host Brady, are the most active when it comes to Jets stuff. So you can follow me at Lisshood, LYSSHOUDE, and you can follow Nick at Nik Lynam, which is NIK, no C in that one, LYNAM. So make sure you check us out on there. Check out SDPN Sports on Twitter, on Discord, on TikTok, on everywhere that they are, because we love to connect with everybody, talk Jets, talk hockey, talk everything. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here tonight. That's kind of it for us. I will see you tomorrow in 2 days. It's not tomorrow theoretically because we're past midnight now. I'll be here on Saturday with my good friend Connor from not Top Line, that's who I have today, from Level Flight Podcast. Connor's a good buddy, and he's done some amazing work, and done all kinds of crazy things this offseason, the last couple seasons, getting more involved in the hockey world, so he's going to be a great ad to have on Saturday. So we'll be doing the Yotes game together, right here, same place. I would say same time, but thank God it's not the same time. So I will see everybody on Saturday. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks again for tuning in to Game Over Winnipeg. We'll see you soon.